I am David Black, and you're watching the first in a series of videos to teach you how to use browser-based media design software to create science media projects. I've taught science and technology courses for over 30 years for middle and high school students, and I like to have them use media design software to demonstrate their mastery of science concepts. The concepts of science are the facts and the theories that we've discovered over many years of experimentation. By creating their own media design projects, students also learn about science at the same time. Today we're going to use Photopea. Now I'm not sure if it should be pronounced Photopea or Photopea, but I like Photopea better, so that's how I'm going to say it. Photopea is a tool very similar to Adobe Photoshop in that it can manipulate images pixel by pixel if necessary. Photoshop is the workhorse design software for professionals, but sometimes it's too expensive for students to be able to afford. Perhaps they lack the means, or maybe they don't have a powerful enough computer to be able to run it. Photopea is browser-based. That means it's free. It can run on any internet browser and run on any computer, including Chromebooks. With Photopea, you have a powerful enough program to be able to free your creative imagination and express yourself while learning science. Let's get to it. To get to Photopea, spell it out in a Google search. That's P-H-O-T-O-P-E-A, Photopea. It's going to be the first thing that you find, and it allows you to read in PSD files if you want to, or just open an image from the computer. What we're going to be doing today is to open up an image that I've already downloaded, and we're going to be creating a digital coloring book. And so we need an image that has good line art. Let me show you what I mean. I'm navigating to where the image is. It's called Rover Coloring Book page, right here. It's opened it up into the Photopea interface. I can zoom in and out just by doing Command plus on my Mac, or Command minus to zoom out. But zooming in, the first thing that we have to do is take a look to see if these lines are what we want. You want the lines to be solid black as much as possible, but you also want them to not have any gaps. Now it looks like these lines are pretty good, but let's zoom in even more. So for me it's Command plus on my Mac, but for you, you might need to do Control plus. So as we're getting closer and closer to them, you can see, now that I've zoomed in all the way to where you can see the actual pixels one by one, you can see that there's a little bit of jaggedness on the edges of these lines. That's called an alias. What I need to do is smooth that out, make the lines smoother and tighter and darker. Where you see some gray pixels around the edges, that's called an anti-alias. And it's there to make it look more natural, but this is still a little bit too jagged. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is pump in some extra pixels. That is, turn up the resolution. I do that by going up here. Now, in Photopea, it's very important that you don't confuse the actual Photopea menu with the top menu at the very top of your browser window. So I'm going to go up here to Image and choose Image Size. I'm going to bring this in. Right now it's 850 by 1100 pixels. If I change this to inches, it is at a resolution of 150 pixels per inch. I'm going to bump that up to 300, which essentially quadruples the number of pixels in this image. I also want to make the image itself larger, so I'm going to make it something like 10 inches tall. If I click off of it, that automatically resizes the width as well because they're linked right now. And I'll say okay. Okay, in the process of doing that, by putting more pixels into it, has forced the computer to create more of an anti-alias. You can see that these lines have more gray around them. I will now need to fix that a little bit. Since there's more pixels to work with, I can blur the image a little bit to get rid of that pixelation, that staircase look to it. That seems kind of counterintuitive. But really, by making it blurrier, I'm smoothing it, and then later I'll sharpen it using the Levels command and the Sharpen command. So let's do the blur. It's under Filter, Blur. Gaussian blur is the best one to use. This is a little bit imprecise to move the slider, so I'm just going to type in 2 pixels and say OK. Now you can see that this line over here is a lot smoother, as are these. but it's also got more gray around it. It's become more anti-aliased. To force the computer to sharpen it a little bit, we're going to turn down the resolution slightly again. So it's under Image, Image Size. I'll keep it the same pixel dimensions or image dimensions, but I'm going to change down the resolution to about 250. Okay, now that pulls some pixels out of the image, forces the computer to sharpen it a little bit, but we're going to take it a little bit further. First, I'm going to use a levels command. I don't want to see any gray lines here. That's going to be under Image, Adjustments, Levels. Now what you're seeing here is a histogram showing a distribution of the number of levels of different types of gray. I'm going to sharpen the image's size by decreasing the range of gray pixels by moving both the black and the white slider inward. Now at the same time, I'll make the entire line darker by moving the gray slider, the midpoint, to the right. See how this line gets sharper? Now, it also means that some things down here, the lines become maybe a little bit too thick. So I need to kind of play with this a bit. Maybe there. Do want them slightly darker again. There we go. So our lines now look good and sharp and smooth. That's exactly what we're after. And we're almost ready to start coloring this. Let's zoom out again. That's Command minus, or if you're on a Chromebook, that's Control minus. The lines are looking nice and a little bit darker than they did before. I don't need to have this text up here or the text at the bottom. So I'm going to crop this image. Right now I'm just moving my trackpad with 2 fingers. If I use the selection command here, the marquee, I'm going to drag a rectangle around this for the part that I want to keep. Say about there. Then I can say Image, Crop. Now that cuts off everything outside of that rectangle. Now to turn off the marching ants around it, they're not exactly marching in Photopea, but they're still called the marching ants. I'm going to do Command D to deselect. All right, so the final thing then is to look to see if our lines are connected. If there are any gaps, then we'll have a hard time coloring the image. We're going to use this black and white line art as basically our selection template. If there are any gaps in this line art, it will be difficult to select the areas that we want to color. So what I'm going to do is come in here and use the paintbrush to finish up these lines. Okay, I'm at the far left-hand side. Here is the paintbrush tool. If I choose that, it gives me a brush of 15 pixels, which, as you can see, is too large. So let me turn this down a little bit. Now remember, I'm working off of the internet, so things aren't quite as fast or responsive as it would be if you're using this inside of Photoshop from your desktop only. Okay, that's 6 pixels. Right now, hardness is all the way up. I'm going to turn that down a little bit, trying to match the anti-alias scene of the background. And let's also make this a black line. Yeah, that matches pretty well. So I'm going to take this over. This line here represents the bottom of the mountains. Got to close that off. I'm doing this all on the original background layer. Yeah, the internet's being a little bit laggy for me here. Let's zoom out and look at that. Are there any other gaps? Well, let's inspect it. I think there are a few more. It looks like there are some gaps right in here. So I'm going to hold this down. If I press Shift, it will constrain it so it'll do a straight line. Any other problems? I'm inspecting everything. Okay, our line art is now ready for us to begin to colorize it. But we don't want to put color on the background layer. That's going to be kept pristine so that we can use it to select areas. So we need to create a new layer just for the color. Here's how we do it. To create a new layer, over here on the right-hand side, you have a number of different windows. Up at the top, you have the History window, which for the most part I don't use very often, but it can come in handy. But we're after this area here, which is called the layers. You can also switch it to channels and paths, and we'll get to that later on. But what we're after is making a new layer. Down at the bottom, there are a number of icons, and what we want to do is use this one, the second from the right. It looks like a piece of paper with a folded page. Click on it, and it makes a new layer called Layer 1. If I double click on the name, I can change this to color. All right, I'll keep background, that makes sense. So to do the selecting, I will go to the background layer, choose that, it's highlighted, and then come over here and use the third tool down, which is called the magic wand. We got our options bar up here. What I'm going to do is make sure that contiguous is turned on, anti-alias is turned on, but the tolerance should probably be turned down here a little bit, maybe to about 30, given the quality of our lines. And let's start with something pretty simple. I'm going to zoom in, and let's do the top of the mast cam here, and just do a simple linear gradient in it. Why a linear gradient? I don't want to see any solid colors in this. That's way too easy. Plus, it's not very natural. So everything, even if it really does have a solid color, will appear as having a gradient in it in nature. So I'll take the magic wand that I've just set up and click on this area. Looks like I did a good job of selecting. I also need to select this area here. So up here in the upper left, we've got some Boolean commands. This creates a new selection. This adds to the current selection. This subtracts from the current selection, and this intersects with it. I'm going to add, and that's turned on right now. So I'm also going to click that area. Okay, so this is where I'm going to put my gradient. There's just one trouble. I still have a few gray pixels around the outside. There's still some anti-aliasing going on. That's why my lines look so smooth. So here's what we're going to do, a little trick. We're going to expand this selection by several pixels so that the marching ants cross into the black lines, and then we'll put the color in the upper layer. So if I go here to select, I can then come down here and say modify and expand. And I'm going to expand this about 3 pixels. Okay, you see now that the marching ants have gone into the black lines around it. All right, now I'm ready to do my first color. Just one thing, let's make sure we're on the color layer. There, I have selected it. Now what we're going to do is pick our foreground and background colors for the gradient. I think I'll do this sort of a cream color, which will be sort of yellowish orange down here. In the color picker, you start by picking the basic hue or color, and then you can pick a tint or a shade in there by changing the saturation and brightness. I think I'll move this a little bit more towards orange. Yeah. So here's like a light beige color. That looks good. That's my foreground color. Then I'll pick on the background color and pick a similar hue, the very same hue, but a little bit darker color. Okay, that looks pretty good. With that selected, I'll click on the gradient tool. There we go. And then click on the swatch here that's showing up in the option bar. Here's my gradient. What we have are 2 color stops ranging from a light, kind of beige color, to a darker color. That's about what I want. And I'll say, okay, we're now ready to put in our gradient. To do this, I'll come up to the area and then I'll hold down the mouse and start dragging across where I want to go. Now, I would be tempted to follow the basic shape of this, but that would make the gradient tilt down. I want it to go straight across. So that's the direction I'm going to drag. Hold this down. I'm holding down Shift to force it to be horizontal, then I'm letting go. Yeah, I'm not terribly happy with those colors. I'm going to make the beige foreground color even lighter. Let's try that gradient again. Holding down Shift again. There, that's more like it. Now I'm going to do Command or Control D to deselect. Marching ants turn off. If I come in and inspect it, you can see that the colors have encroached on our dark lines. That doesn't look very good either. I want to have the dark lines nice and clear the way that we made them. There is a trick. I can take this new layer, which is another reason for doing the layer, and change its blending mode. That's where it says normal up here at the top of the layer palette. If I open up the pull down menu, I'm going to change it from normal, which only shows the top layer, to darken. And there you have it. The darker pixels are showing through. What the darken blending mode does is it looks at the pixels, the same pixel inside of the two layers, and picks whichever one is darker. All right, so the dark part of the line shows through, the light part doesn't. I've got this one little area here that does need some coloring in, and so I'm going to pick color here, kind of in between the two of them, and then just fix it with the paintbrush here. It's a little bit too light. Okay. I could also take the eyedropper and actually match up the color perfectly if I wanted. Okay, there we go. Hey, we have created our first color area. It looks good. It's kind of a slow process, but as you do this, you get faster. I'm a lot slower because I'm talking too much. Now this would work well if all we have are flat surfaces, but we don't have entirely flat surfaces. There are a lot of cylinders in this image. The wheels, the rocker bogie suspension, the elbow joint of the arm that goes out. So what we're going to have to do is kind of change how we do gradients. We'll add some extra stops to it. So let's talk about that. I'll go to the background layer again and take my magic wand. Let's say we're going to do this front wheel. So I'll select an area here, right there, and then I'm going to add to it by clicking on each one of these areas between the treads of perseverance. Okay, there I have it selected. And I'll go ahead and do the expansion that we did before. So that's select, modify, expand. 3 pixels should already be in here, so I'll say okay. Okay, so now it's crossed into the black lines. Now let's set up our gradient differently. I'm going to come in and pick a color. Basic hue is going to be kind of bluish. I'm going to select mostly gray colors with just a hint of blue. I'll start out with a darkish gray, kind of a charcoal. And then I'll end up also with bluish colors, a little bit more blue, with a slightly darker one, about in there. There's my foreground and background. Let's go to the gradient tool. Here's the gradient. It doesn't really look like much of a gradient, but what we're going to do is add another color tab to it. About here, not quite in the middle, but a little bit to the left, I'm going to click right under the gradient bar. That creates a new tab and gives me a swatch down here. If I click on it, I can go and pick a lighter color, again with just a hint of blue in it. So this is what we've got. It goes from medium dark to light, back to dark again. Now if I drag this, I'm going to have to make sure I go straight down perpendicular. I should take it about like this and put the color in. Okay. Oops, I made a mistake. Do you see what the mistake is? I forgot to switch my layer. You will make this mistake. And if I were watching this and inspecting what you're doing, that would be the first thing I'd look at. If I turn off the color layer, yeah, the color layer is off, but you still see the colors I put in. So I'm going to have to do Command Z. Oh. There we go. Had to go back several steps. Make sure I'm on the color layer and then drag the gradient out again. There we go. Then Command D. Since it's on the color layer, it's already set to darken blending mode, and that looks like a cylinder. It's got the right kind of lighting on it, with a highlight where the sun is shining on it, and then darker shadows. But we also need to fix this one little area I can see, zooming in on it, where it didn't quite get the color that it needed. It's got the right foreground color already. So going to the brush tool, and I'm just going to paint in it by hand. So if you have your color layer set to darken blending mode, you can paint in areas by hand if you need to. I deselected, now I'm zooming out. Okay, so that is how you do cylinders. and there are a lot of cylinders on this. One more thing I'd like to show you, and that is how to do spherical areas. There aren't really a lot of them here, but let's say I want to put the sun up in the sky. So if I go back to the background layer, if I go to my selection tools, hold it down here on what's called the marquee, I'm going to choose the ellipse selection tool. Then up in the sky, as I drag this out, if I hold down Shift, it forces this to be a perfect circle. The sun on Mars is much smaller than it is on Earth. What I'm going to do now is put a stroke around this that's black, so it'll look like the background image again. So that's under Edit, Stroke. I can choose how many pixels to make this. These lines are probably about 5 pixels wide, it looks like. That's good. And I can choose where it's inside or outside or centered. And the blending mode should be normal, so I say OK. And it makes dark lines around it. I can now deselect, and I've got a sun in the sky. But now let's do a gradient to make this look like a sphere. I put this on the background, so we'll use the same technique as before. It's going to be a little bit anti-aliased, but I'm not going to worry about that. If I needed to, I could put a slight blur on it, or even use the smudge tool and blur it slightly. There's different ways, but it's okay. Let's go ahead and select it with the magic wand. There we go. I'm going up to the color layer before I forget. I'm expanding my selection, same amount that we've done before. It crosses over into the dark lines. Now, let's set up a gradient. If I'm going to do the sun, I'm going to pick for my foreground color a bright yellow color. I'm going to make it quite light. Let's make sure it's yellow and not greenish. About there. And for my background, let's make it more orange and a more saturated color. Okay. Now, if I go to the gradient tool, one of the things that's up here is that it says linear. I'm going to change that to radial. It's going to go from the center out. And then if I click on the swatch, I'm going to have to change this tab here. So I'm going to make this, this starts with a light color. Now I'm going to go to a highly saturated version of that color. So a bright yellow, maybe a little bit of orange in it. I can slide this slider around, and then it goes to orange on the outside. If I were doing an actual sphere, I could pick up a little ambient color where basically light is bouncing off other objects like the tabletop and kind of wrapping the ambient around the edge. But this is the sun, it gives off light, so it's not going to have a dark shadow, it's just going to have ambient color. So this should be fine. Okay, so light color to intense color to slightly darker color. Now, instead of starting this at the center and dragging outward, I'm going to kind of offset this a little bit. I've got light coming from upper right, so I mean, this should be just bright white no matter what, but I want to show how to make a sphere. I'll start here, upper right, that's where my lighting source is coming from, and I'll start about, a fourth of the way in, drag across the center with my gradient tool to the opposite side, like that. Okay, it looks pretty good. And I did it on the color layer this time. So that's how you do a sphere and a cylinder and a flat object gradient. I can continue to do this and fill in all the areas. There's one more thing I'd like to show you, and that is, what if you wanted to put a texture instead of just coloring it in with a gradient? Well, to find a texture, you can go out and find a photograph. Let's say I want to put it on the body of the probe here. Should be kind of a gold foil look to it. So I'm going to go out and find that. I'll bring that back in just a moment. Okay, I have found a good picture of gold foil. What I'm going to do is import that. So if I go to File, Open, I'll find that. I actually have put it in this folder. It's called gold foil. See, that looks very nice. I'll open it up, and it brings it up as a brand new file. What I want to do is to copy all of this, and I'll select all of it, then I'll copy it to the clipboard, and then paste it into a new layer here in my image. So to select all of it, it's going to be Command A or Control A, the marching ants go around all of it, and I'll copy it with Command C or Edit Copy. Then I'm going to click over here on my rover coloring page and say Command V to paste or edit paste. Okay, there it is. One of the things you'll have to do is resize this so it fits. But in the meantime, I think that's about the right size. Maybe let's make it a little bit smaller. What I'm going to do is choose Edit, Transform, Scale, because I only want to scale this one layer. You'll see this kind of bounding box come in. As I drag this over, we'll scale it. I just need it big enough to kind of cover the box here. I'm going to move it into position, but now I can't see what I'm trying to select. If I hit Return, that will finalize the changes. Now I'm going to click the eyeball here by the gold layer, which will turn off its visibility, go down to the background layer, and then use my magic wand to select the part of this that I want to see. There's more than one area, so I need to select all the areas involved here with this kind of background gold foil. We'll say Select, Modify, Expand like we've been doing. Make sure we go up to the layer where this gold foil is. In fact, let's name that. I'm going to call it Gold. All right. On the gold layer, I'm going to turn on its eyeball so I can see it. I've already got the area selected. So now what I'm going to do is essentially cut holes in the layer using a layer mask. This is the layer mask button right here at the bottom of the layers window. I click on it, it creates a mask. Where I have it selected, it shows the gold layer, but where it's not selected, it becomes a hole that cuts down through that layer to show the layers underneath. And you can see it's also created this grayscale image that's linked to my main image, so if I move one of them around, the other will move with it. Let's see what happens if I use the Move tool. Well, the gold comes along with it. I'm going to do Command Z and takes it right back. But please don't forget to also turn this to dark and blending mode so my lines look good. All right, so we can do the same thing over here with this side of the rover and continue this process, putting in textures where we want to put them. If I want to, say, put a nice texture for the surface of Mars behind the rover here, I'll just go and find a photo of the surface of Mars. We've got photos of that now. And then just make sure it's the right size, paste it into a new layer, then use the background layer to select the areas I want to see and create a layer mask like we just did. So this is basically then the technique for colorizing your image. I've gone ahead and finished the image by filling in all of the areas. And as you can see, it looks pretty good. There are a couple of things I still need to do before I can use this in other software. Right now in Photopea, it's got different layers, it's got masks, and most other programs can't read multiple layers. So what we'll have to do is flatten the image. Or I can go up to the Layers menu at the top and choose Flatten Image. You can now save this image to your Downloads folder or your desktop, depending on what kind of computer you have. Save it in JPEG or PNG format, and then it can be used in a lot of other browser-based software like Wick Editor or WeVideo or Canva. Once you learn how to use Photopea, if you ever get the chance to purchase your own copy of Photoshop, you'll already know how to use it because the tools and the menu bars and how it works are basically the same. There are many ways in which I can use images to create media design projects that demonstrate mastery of science concepts. For example, if I wanted to show how the different parts of this rover worked, I could very easily set up text layers and draw lines to point to different parts or talk about their functions, and maybe save out different versions of them and put them into, say, WeVideo and have it pop up over time. Another idea is I could use these images and create a graphic novel talking about the adventures of Perseverance rover on Mars. That would be fun. Here's an example of a project that a student did of a coloring book or graphic novel. The student drew the line art by hand, inked it in with a pen, and then she also colored it by hand as well. But you could just as easily take a photo of it under good lighting conditions or scan it, bring it into your computer into Photopea, and add the color there the way we just did. And then you'll have different pages, all colorized, and you can add them together and create, print them out as a PDF file, or just print them out and put them into a physical book that you can use. Here's an example of a poster that I created a number of years ago for the National Energy Foundation. It's on the chemistry of fertilizers. I first drew it by hand, scanned it into Photoshop, added the colors and text just as I described it to you here, and then on the back I created some black and white diagrams and text and sold that. I got a commission for doing it. This is definitely a program that is a marketable skill if you can learn how to use it. So it's not just for learning science, this is for making money. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. Thank you for learning.